Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more about those services and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Tim, this week's question we had come from a webinar that we did recently, and I think it's a really good opportunity for us to talk about some of the strategies around creating buckets for saving. And that question was, how might I structure bank accounts to make budgeting easier? And how can I consider utilizing direct deposit to make my budgeting process more systematic? And I've heard you, Tim, talk several times on the show about how for you and Shay, you guys have buckets of savings, whether it's things like saving up for a trip or a vacation, maybe it's a future investment property. Back in the day, you had one before you purchased the RV.
Yeah.
So talk to us about why you feel like that bucketing system is so important and why we implement that in terms of the planning team working with clients.
The way that I look at, how money should flow through one's household is I look at it kind of in three separate silos. And one, there really shouldn't be a whole lot of flow. It should be pretty static. So the way that I structure this in my mind is you kind of have your everyday checking account. So this is where you get paid into this account and you spend most of the bills, pay most of the bills out of this account. On the other side of the spectrum, you have your emergency fund. So the emergency fund would be the second silo. So this is where you park 3 to 6 months of non-discretionary monthly expenses. So these are expenses that are going to go out the door regardless if you work or not. A mortgage payment, rent payment, student loans, insurance, premiums, food, all that stuff. And that basically is, okay, I need $20,000, YFP says I need $20,000. I'm going to stick that in a high yield savings account and just forget it's there. The third kind of silo, which I think is really important to kind of align your spending with your goals, your savings with your goals, is the sinking funds. So the sinking funds are, so Tim, if we sat down and you and Jess were saying, hey, we really want to, purchase, like we want to move and kind of upgrade a house. So, we want to, then buy an investment property. We want to make sure we're taking the boys on trips. The sinking funds that we would establish for you would probably be something like home purchase, which we would then either, set a target and a timeline for that says, okay, every month we're going to put $500 into that until it reaches, a $30,000 down payment. We could also have an investment property, or sometimes we would repurpose the home purchase account to an investment property. A lot of times what I tell homeowners is like, after you have that home purchase, you're going to want to repurpose it to a home maintenance because you're going to have those things that pop up. And then the other one, outside of investment property is going to be the travel fund. And the way that we have our travel fund is we have a travel fund, and then we have sub accounts that says, okay, this is the sub account for Disney World. This is the sub account for Paris. This is the sub account for, camping, that type of thing. So I think what that does is it clearly delineates and connects your spending and saving and budgeting to the goals that you have.
Yes.
And I think that's so important because a lot of the times that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. If I look at your account and you have $50,000 in cash, in your savings account, and I say, hey, what's that for? You're like, well, 20 of that is for emergency fund, 10 of that is for this. 10. So you're already doing the mental accounting anyway.
Yeah.
So my point is like, do the actual accounting, like actually delineate it out, set a target. So we have some things like, so another example of this, we have a kid account. It's a savings account, and each kid has a sub bucket that we put an amount of money in. And this is for things like activities and Benji's in there. Benji's our dog. We just basically took Benji to the vet and spent, a couple $100, which is not in our regular budget because we go once a year. He gets groomed every couple months. So these are, back in the days, they would spike up, and I would be like, oh, where are we going to get this money from? So we had to pull out the credit card and then figure it out later. So now we're just making those payments monthly. And then when they come up, we say, okay, Benji's vet bill was $300. So we're going to move that and pay that off. So some of these types of savings are ongoing. So as Benji gets older, his vet bills are going to increase. Like we'll just kind of let that go. Some of these is like once you get to that target, you turn it off and then you repurpose that $500 as the example I gave you before. And we say, okay, now we want to move some of that here and some of that here. So the whole design of this is really to kind of be super intentional with your budget, with your savings, and really align that. So like when I look at someone's banking, I think that their banking should look very much like what are their kind of near-term goals, right? We know retirement is going to be taken care of by the 401k, the IRA, that world. And that's a long-term thing, which allows us to invest and take risk. The shorter term things that we're talking about here, if you were to say, hey, I have $50,000 and I want to put it into an investment property next year, where should I invest it? I'm like, don't. Because, the market could be down 30% next year. It could be up. We have no idea. So for that safety, put it in something, get a known interest rate back. And then you kind of have that tweener stage of what if it's 3 years? What if it's 5 years? And maybe you do a little bit of investing, a little bit of savings. But for me, I think the purpose of this question is it's just being intentional with what your plan is. And for a lot of us, it's sitting down and saying, what is the plan? What is the goals? And then, construct your banking in a way that you're fulfilling, you're starting to check those things off and just being intentional with the money.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things, Tim, that I think we underestimate the power of.
Yeah.
And we see it with planning clients. When you and I have the opportunity to speak with, pharmacists, fellows, residents, different groups, this is one of those like light bulb moments where people take this away and they apply it. They're like, wow, that was a game changer. And what's fascinating about it, you gave a cool example with $50,000. You could have, numbers that are no different, right? You got $50,000 kind of in one lump account, and then you have $50,000 in another that's divided between different goals. But what happens is often the momentum that can come from visualizing those goals, seeing the progress towards savings in those goals, and then the further action that you take towards those. And it takes a lot. We talk about this often on the show. It takes a lot of the unknown, or I wish, I hope, what about this, what about that, and the stress that can come from that out of our mind. And we have a system. Ramit said, he talks about it in the book, I'll Teach You to Be Rich. He talks about it as automation. You're automating your financial plan based on the goals. Sure, it takes a little bit of time to get set up, probably quicker than you may think. But then ideally, each and every month, we're getting paid. That money's going into our checking account via direct deposit. And from there, we're automatically allocating it to the different savings accounts, that Tim's talking about here. And we outline this a little bit in detail in episode 57 of the podcast. We'll link to that in the show notes. But Tim, visually paint a picture, right? So when you log on to your Ally account, you see multiple things, right? You've got a base checking account.
Yes.
And then you see all these different sub accounts that are named according to the goal, correct?
Correct. So I'm looking at my Ally account right now, and so basically the way that we have ours set up is I have 3 checking accounts. I have one that's a joint with my wife. I have one that's mine, that's kind of like my play money to do as I wish. And then I have one with you as we, do different things, money wise. So, and then from there, it's supported by the first thing I see from there is my high yield savings. It's the emergency fund. So it says the name of the account is emergency fund. And then the way that I delineate it is I put a little asterisk next to that, and that means it's fully funded.
I like that. Okay.
The one under that is the cars account. So this is where we are essentially, it's a maintenance account, but then it's also, we're basically paying ourselves a car payment. So then when we go to buy our next car, we're not taking out a note, or we're taking out a very small note. So for that one, there's a plus sign next to cars, because it just tells me that it's still yet to be funded. We have a gift account. So one of the things that we ran into, so like we like to celebrate Christmas, and at the holidays, we're buying gifts. It was always like a spike in our spending at the end. Yeah. So we're like, okay, if we spend, just throwing numbers out, $1,200 for Christmas, then $100 a month goes into that account. And then at the end, that's our pot of money to spend. And we'll spend it on different things throughout the year. So we might plus that up. But we have a home maintenance. We have a home down payment account. We have the kids account that I mentioned. We have a travel account. We have annual expenses. And a lot of these have sub accounts. So the annual expenses would be, we have an au pair that we, we'll basically save for that. Life insurance premiums, things like that we're going to pay in bulk. And then we have an account that's just dedicated to our real estate investment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, the address of the house, and then there's a vacancy sub account, there's a CapEx sub account, there's a clean and sub account. And then because I'm a little bit of a nerd under that, I have kind of a Q1 CD, Q2 CD, Q3. So what I did was I divided my emergency fund up by in half. So I think our emergency fund is like $20,000. So I divided that in half. So 10,000 sits in the high yield account, and then 10,000 is basically divided up into each of these CDs. So a Q1, so $2,500 into each one. So they renew. So it's interesting to see. I'm looking at this. My Q1 CD, the interest rate is 0.6%, Tim.
Yeah, what's it going up
My
to?
Q4 CD is 3.15%. So what is essentially doing what I wanted to do is like I'm hedging. I'm trying to get a little bit more return out, knowing that if I do have to access these CDs, I can. They're still very, very liquid.
That's crazy though. The high yield savings now is higher than the CD rates,
Yeah.
right? That were back in Q1. So yeah.
And I think to kind of go back to your point, like one of the things about this is like, I feel like if this was just a pot of like $50,000, I think there's a few things that go on, but the two things that go on is like, I think people, a lot of do the mental accounting anyway, but I think you can kind of be a prisoner of the moment, and you can say, oh, look, this happened. I have to do this right away. And for me, kind of being a prisoner moment or trying to direct money where there's a lot of pain or excitement, like I would have to like take that money out of like the Disney account. You know what I mean? Like the travel account. So for me, it really, when you put money into 401k, most people, they leave it there because they know of all the penalties related to that. So you really have to kind of like look at your goals and kind of say like, no, this 60,000, 80,000 Tesla that I really want because it's cool, like I got to take money from other places to apply for that.
Is it worth it?
So then a bit, but I think the other thing too is almost the opposite side of the spectrum is like, I think sometimes you're just like, what's this money for? You're like, I don't know. Like, what is it for? Like, I don't really know. I have this pot of, and I think we've seen this a lot over the pause with student loans. People have been amassing dollars, and a lot of it at first was like emergency fund, and then we kind of got past that. It's like, okay, what's this pot of money for? It's like, I don't know. And I think one of the things that we like to do with clients is kind of break that down and say, okay, this is the goal for this. Let's seed that with 5,000, and we'll save another 10, and then you'll be good to go. So it's a very intentional thing. I know we talked about automation, which we definitely do that to a degree, but part of like Shay and I's check-in is we look at our budget and we look at our buckets and we clean up the buckets because things change. But then we say, okay, like we know that this cost is going up. So we have to, we got to this goal. So we're going to turn that off and then basically redirect those dollars elsewhere. And then I'm always like, can we save more? Because that's me. But a lot of this is kind of right up her wheelhouse because it's like, it's for today things. It's not necessarily for retirement, which is in, 30, 40 years. So for us, I think when we talk about this, it kind of gives us a lot of like juice. It gives us like a lot of excitement because like we're seeing progress. We did the things with the RV. Okay, we did that trip is in the books. We handled that major expense. So I think it gives us a lot of juice and energy to kind of keep going and be excited about like what's on the horizon for us. So we kind of nerd out on this a little bit.
Well, I think the reason that is it's the practical implementation of the vision, right? I mean, it's one thing that we have the vision. It's another thing that we actually start to see it come to life, in terms of the buckets and things. So I love it. And for folks that are, hearing this thinking, oh man, I'm getting jacked up, and I'm also like overwhelmed with, I just heard, rattle off 6, 7, 8 accounts. Like, just start with one. I think the low hanging fruit is often, that maybe you've got some money that in your mind you're looking at it as part of an emergency fund that's represented just in one lump account. Like, start with the emergency fund, call it that, whether it's $500 or $30,000, like get it out into a separate account. And then as you further define your goals and get clarity, obviously you can get more detailed, with the system that you have, but don't get paralyzed, with getting started. So
I think the other thing just to mention real quick, Tim, is like, I think the danger here is that and I've said this before, I would do a lot of one or two things than a little bit of like,
that's right.
8 things. Right. So a lot of these accounts that we're funding, like we've turned off because we've met our target that we need there.
Yeah.
Some that we're always going to be like, the kids account, the Benji account, like I mentioned, we're just going to keep rolling with that. But I would say, focus on like if you don't have the emergency fund, if you're that person that has the $50,000 and you're like, okay, I probably need 20, peel that off, park the 20 there. And then the
Yep.
30, you would say, okay, I have a trip coming up. That's going to be $5,000. So then, and then once you kind of get that dollar seated, then you would sit down and say, okay, I think I can save $1,000 or $500, whatever the amount, and then start
Yeah.
saying, okay, I'm going to pick these two things and I'm going to put 500 there and 500 there. So I think the danger sometimes is like, all right, I have $1,000 and I'm going to spread that across 20 accounts, and then you achieve a lot of nothing. So it's almost like, sprint to the finish line for this goal. Once that's off, shut
Yep.
it off and then go to the next one. And I think that's you'll have a better feeling of progress and an accomplishment if you roll that way.
Yeah, and I want to give another shout out to our planning team because I think this is such a valuable part throughout the planning relationship, but especially early on, is that you have, an objective third party ask some really good
Sure.
questions.
Yep.
Let's get clarity on the goals, the buckets, the system, some accountability in developing that. And just putting it on paper. I remember, Jess and I working with you early on. It's like, okay, spreadsheet, what are the goals? What's the priority of those goals? What's it going to take to consider that fully funded? And where are we at with those today? And once you get that momentum going, as you mentioned, kind of the system of like asterisk equals fully funded, plus sign equals you got work to do. Like you start to see, the progress, and it's very clear of what we want to be working on,
Yep.
coming up into the future. So glad this question came forth in a webinar that we did. I think it's a great one in terms of an opportunity to talk again about the savings buckets. If you have a question that you'd like to have featured on an upcoming episode, two ways that you can submit a question. One, you can email us info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can also record a question by going to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP. As we wrap up this week's segment of the podcast, an important reminder that the content in this show is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your week.